There's a special kind of betrayal that only family can deliver. Standing alone in Boston Logan International, my designer luggage at my feet, I watched my children walk away on my 75th birthday. The coral blouse I'd chosen specially for Hawaii caught the harsh fluorescent light as around me. Other families embraced, laughed, prepared for adventures together. But mine had just informed me they couldn't afford the incidental expenses of a trip I was paying for, right before one son climbed into his new BMW and my daughter checked her watch, late for a salon appointment. 75 years of love, sacrifice, and generosity dismissed with casual cruelty and fabricated excuses. They say blood is thicker than water, but what happens when that blood runs cold? What happens when the very people meant to cherish you treat you like a walking ATM? As their figures disappeared into the terminal crowd, something crystallized within me, a cold, steady resolve. They had just taught me the most valuable lesson of my life, and soon, very soon, they would receive their own education in return. The rumble of my 1967 Mustang convertible's engine had always been a source of comfort. As I navigated the early morning highway toward Logan International Airport, the familiar vibration beneath my hands connected me to James in a way nothing else could. He'd restored this beauty himself, spending countless weekends in our garage, and gifted it to me on our 30th anniversary just 2 years before cancer took him. "You've got plenty of adventure left in you, Ellie," he'd said, handing me the keys with that crooked smile I adored. "This old girl's got the spirit to match yours." Today, on my 75th birthday, I was finally embracing that spirit of adventure. 8 months of planning had culminated in this moment, a luxury family vacation to Hawaii with my 3 children, their spouses, and my 5 grandchildren. The sky above Boston was just beginning to lighten as I drove, painting the horizon in gentle strokes of pink and gold. It felt like a good omen. My phone chimed with a text message. At the next stoplight, I glanced down to see a message from my youngest son. "On our way, Mom. See you at the meeting point. Happy birthday." I smiled. Daniel had always been thoughtful that way, remembering to acknowledge special occasions. His business acumen might not match his older brother's, but his heart was in the right place. I tucked the phone away as the light changed, my excitement building as I drew closer to the airport. Finding parking took longer than expected, and by the time I wheeled my designer luggage a splurge for this special trip into the terminal, the morning rush was in full swing. Business travelers strode purposefully past families corralling excited children and mountains of luggage. I checked my watch, 7:40 a.m. Our meeting time was 8 at the statue near the international terminal, giving us plenty of time before our 10:30 flight. As I made my way through the crowded concourse, I noticed an elderly couple struggling with their luggage. The man, who appeared to be in his early 80s, was trying to manage 2 large suitcases while his wife clutched his arm, looking overwhelmed by the bustling airport. "Let me help you with that," I offered, stopping beside them. "Oh, you're very kind," the woman said, relief flooding her face. "Harold's back isn't what it used to be, but he insists on handling everything himself." Harold looked up, his weathered face creased with a mix of gratitude and embarrassment. "Thank you, miss. Just need to get these to the check-in counter." I smiled at the miss comment. At 75, it had been quite some time since anyone had called me that. Together, we navigated toward the airline counter, making small talk along the way. They were flying to San Diego to visit their first great-grandchild. By the time we reached the counter, I'd learned they'd been married for 61 years and had survived not only decades together, but also Harold's 2 heart attacks and her battle with breast cancer. "You have a good heart," Harold said as we parted ways. "Whoever's waiting for you is lucky to have you in their life." His words warmed me as I hurried toward the meeting point, now running a few minutes late. I didn't mind, though. Some things were more important than punctuality, and helping people who reminded me of what James and I might have been had we been granted more time together felt right, especially today. As I approached our meeting spot, I saw them, my family, gathered in a tight cluster. Jessica, my eldest at 48, was speaking animatedly, her hands moving in that expressive way she'd inherited from her father. Thomas stood next to her, checking his watch with the same furrowed brow he'd had since childhood whenever he was impatient. Daniel was on his phone, nodding occasionally at whatever his wife Amber was saying. The grandchildren were there too, Jessica's teenagers Lily and Ryan, Thomas's 10-year-old twins Emma and Jacob, and Daniel's 6-year-old daughter Sophia. They weren't bouncing with excitement as I'd expected. Instead, they stood quietly, confusion evident on their young faces. Before I could call out to them, a commotion erupted from somewhere behind me. A security announcement blared overhead. "Attention all passengers. Security personnel are investigating an unattended bag in Terminal B. Please remain calm and follow staff instructions." People began moving quickly, some looking concerned. others annoyed at the delay. Airport security staff appeared, directing travelers away from a section of the terminal. The atmosphere shifted from bustling routine to tense alertness in seconds. I quickened my pace toward my family, watching as my grandchildren's expressions shifted from confusion to worry amid the growing chaos. Thomas spotted me first, saying something to the others that made them all turn in my direction. "There you are," Jessica said as I reached them. Her tone wasn't relieved or welcoming, it was strangely tight. "We were about to call you. Sorry I'm a bit late," I explained, slightly out of breath. I was helping an elderly couple with their luggage. "What's happening over there?" I gestured toward the security activity. "Some kind of security issue," Thomas said dismissively. "Mom, we need to talk." Something in his voice made my stomach tighten. I looked around at their faces, all avoiding direct eye contact except for little Sophia, who broke away from her mother to wrap her arms around my legs. "Happy birthday, Grandma. Are we still going to see dolphins?" I bent down to hug her. "That's the plan, sweetheart. We have a special boat trip scheduled for tomorrow." When I straightened, the adults were exchanging glances I couldn't quite interpret. Daniel cleared his throat. "Mom, something's come up." The security commotion was escalating behind us. An announcement requested that all passengers move away from the affected area. People streamed past us, some looking anxious, others annoyed. "Let's move away from here first," Thomas suggested, guiding us toward a quieter area near the windows overlooking the tarmac. Once we were away from the immediate crowd, Jessica took a deep breath. "Mom, we've been talking, and we don't think we can go on this trip." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What do you mean everything's booked? The flights, the resort, the activities? Today is my birthday. We've been planning this for months." "We know, Mom," Daniel said, his voice lacking conviction. "But money's been really tight lately for all of us. The economy's been unpredictable, and when we looked at all the additional expenses, I repeated, bewildered. I paid for everything, the flights, the accommodations, all the activities. You know this. We discussed it numerous times." "Well, yes," Jessica said, shifting uncomfortably. "But there are other expenses too. Airport parking, drinks, souvenirs, tips. It all adds up. And honestly, we're all in a really tight spot financially right now." I stared at her, trying to process what I was hearing. They were talking about parking fees and souvenirs when I had spent nearly $30,000 to make this trip possible for everyone. First-class flights, luxury family suites at one of the finest resorts on Maui, private tours, a chartered boat for dolphin watching. I had spared no expense to make this birthday celebration memorable for all of us. "If money is the issue," I said carefully, "I can cover the incidental expenses too. You know I can." An uncomfortable silence followed. The grandchildren stood behind their parents, looking confused and disappointed. Sophia was tugging on Daniel's pant leg, whispering something about dolphins. Ryan, at 16, was staring at the floor, clearly embarrassed by the situation. It was Amber, Daniel's wife, who finally spoke up. "Eleanor, we've all been talking, and we think it might be better if you just went by yourself. You know, have some alone time. Enjoy the peace and quiet. At your age, wouldn't that be more relaxing anyway?" At your age, the words hung in the air like a slap, as if being 75 meant I should be grateful for solitude instead of craving the company of my family, as if reaching this milestone birthday was something to be endured in isolation rather than celebrated with the people I loved most. "You're not coming," I said flatly. It wasn't a question, but the slow, painful realization of a truth I hadn't wanted to accept. "None of you are coming." "Mom, don't be dramatic," Jessica said, but her voice lacked conviction. "We're just postponing. Maybe we can reschedule for later in the year when things are more stable financially." Postponing on my 75th birthday, after months of planning after I paid for everything. My voice remained steady, but inside, a storm was brewing. The airport security situation behind us was being resolved. Announcements indicating the suspicious package had been cleared, but the security of my family relationship was suddenly in question in a way it had never been before. Thomas checked his watch. "Mom, we really need to get going. Traffic back into the city is going to be terrible, and we all have things we need to do today." Things they needed to do. On my birthday, instead of celebrating with me in Hawaii. "Wait," I called out as they began to gather their children. "Just wait a minute." They turned back reluctantly. Jessica's husband, Greg, was already looking at his phone, as if this entire situation was nothing more than an inconvenience in his day. "I need to understand this," I said, stepping closer. "You're telling me that you've decided as a group, without consulting me, that you're not going on this trip that I planned and paid for to celebrate my 75th birthday." Mom, Jessica started, but I held up my hand. No, let me finish. You're telling me that despite the fact that I've covered every major expense, you can't afford the incidental costs of a week in Hawaii, the same week where Thomas just bought a new BMW, where Jessica just renovated her master bathroom, and where Daniel just took his family to Disney World. The silence that followed was telling. They had forgotten that I paid attention, that I noticed their social media posts and casual mentions of purchases. They had forgotten that despite my age, my mind was sharp and my memory intact. Those are different situations, Thomas said defensively. Those were necessary expenses. Necessary? I repeated incredulously. A luxury car is necessary, but celebrating your mother's 75th birthday is not? You're being unfair, Daniel said, his voice rising slightly. You don't understand the pressures we're under. We have mortgages, car payments, kids' activities. It's not as simple as you're making it seem. I looked at each of their faces, searching for something remorse, love, even basic respect. What I saw instead was impatience, annoyance, and in some cases, barely concealed irritation that I was making this difficult for them. You're right, I said quietly. I don't understand. I don't understand how the children I raised, the children I sacrificed for, the children I've supported financially and emotionally for decades, can stand here on my birthday and tell me that I'm not worth a week of their time. It's not about worth, Mom, Jessica said, but her words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Isn't it because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like that? It looks like you've weighed the value of my happiness against the inconvenience of spending time with me, and I've come up lacking. The PA system announced that our flight was now boarding. The sound cut through our conversation like a knife, a reminder of what this moment was supposed to be. We should have been walking toward the gate together, excited and laughing, ready to make memories that would last a lifetime. Instead, I was standing alone with my suitcase, watching my family prepare to abandon me on the most important birthday of my life. We really do need to go, Greg said, not even bothering to address me directly. The parking meter's running out. The parking meter. Of all the concerns in this moment, the parking meter was what worried him most. I watched as they began to walk away, my heart breaking with each step they took. The grandchildren looked back at me with confusion and sadness, but their parents kept them moving forward. Sophia started to cry, asking why Grandma wasn't coming with them, but Amber shushed her and promised ice cream if she would just keep walking. Ice cream, a consolation prize for the disappointment of not spending a week in paradise with their grandmother. I stood there for several minutes after they disappeared from sight, trying to process what had just happened. Around me, other families were hugging goodbye, couples were holding hands as they waited for their flights, and children were bouncing with excitement about their upcoming adventures. But I was alone. On my 75th birthday, I was completely and utterly alone. The logical thing to do would have been to cancel the trip, go home, and cry into a glass of wine while watching old movies. The sensible thing would have been to call the airline and the hotel, explain the situation, and try to salvage what I could from the financial loss. But as I stood there in that airport terminal, something inside me shifted. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe it was just the realization that I had spent too many years allowing other people to dictate my happiness. Whatever it was, I made a decision that would change everything. I picked up my suitcase, straightened my shoulders, and walked toward the gate. If my family didn't want to celebrate my birthday with me, then I would celebrate it myself. And maybe, just maybe, it was time they learned what it felt like to lose something valuable. As I handed my boarding pass to the gate agent, my phone buzzed with a text message from Jessica. Have a nice trip. Mom, we'll talk when you get back. Have a nice trip. As if their abandonment was just a minor inconvenience. As if my feelings didn't matter. As if 75 years of life and love could be dismissed with a casual text message. I turned off my phone without responding and settled into my first-class seat. Through the airplane window, I could see the terminal where my family had left me standing alone, but I wasn't feeling sorry for myself anymore. I was feeling something else entirely. I was feeling like it was time for some long overdue lessons about respect, gratitude, and the true cost of taking someone for granted. As the plane began taxiing down the runway, a commotion erupted several rows behind me. A flight attendant rushed past, her face tense. Moments later, the captain's voice came over the intercom. If there's a doctor on board, please make yourself known to the cabin crew immediately. No one stood up. The flight attendants exchanged worried glances as they hurried toward the back of the plane. Without thinking, I unbuckled my seatbelt and stood. I'm not a doctor, I announced, but I was a hospital volunteer for 15 years and had emergency response training. The lead flight attendant looked relieved. Please, ma'am, if you could help, we have a passenger who seems to be having some kind of attack. I followed her to the back of the plane, where a middle aged man was slumped in his seat, clutching his chest, his face ashen and sweaty. His terrified wife was beside him, holding his hand and looking helplessly at us. Heart attack symptoms, I said quietly to the flight attendant. Do you have an AED on board? She nodded and hurried to retrieve it while I knelt beside the man. Sir, my name is Eleanor. I'm going to help you until we can get you proper medical attention. Can you tell me your name? Michael, he gasped. Michael Donovan. Okay, Michael, I need you to try to stay calm. Are you taking any medications regularly? His wife answered. Blood pressure medication. He's been under a lot of stress lately with work. Working with the flight attendants, I helped move Michael to a clear area where he could lie flat. The AED was brought, but after checking his pulse and breathing, I determined we didn't need it yet. He was conscious and responsive, though clearly in distress. The captain announced we were returning to the gate where emergency medical personnel would meet us. I stayed with Michael, monitoring his condition and keeping him as comfortable as possible. I spoke to him in a calm, steady voice, the same one I'd used with my children when they were sick or frightened. You're going to be all right, Michael. Help is on the way. Just focus on my voice and try to keep your breathing slow and steady. His wife gripped my hand. Thank you, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I didn't know what to do. When we reached the gate, paramedics boarded quickly and took over. As they were preparing to transport Michael, he reached for my hand. You saved my life, he said weakly. I won't forget this. I squeezed his hand gently. Take care of yourself, Michael, and maybe take your wife on that vacation she deserves when you're better. After the medical emergency was resolved, our flight was delayed for another hour. The other passengers regarded me with newfound respect, several coming by to thank me for stepping up. The captain even made an announcement acknowledging my assistance. As we finally took off, this time without incident, I reflected on what had just happened. In a crisis, I hadn't hesitated. At 75, I was still capable, still valuable, still able to make a difference. The irony wasn't lost on me. Strangers on this plane showed me more appreciation in the span of an hour than my own children had in years. The remainder of the flight passed uneventfully, giving me 5 uninterrupted hours to think. I pulled out my reading glasses and the small leather notebook I always carried. For decades, it had been my companion through business meetings, doctor appointments, and family gatherings. Today, it would serve a different purpose entirely. Today, it would help me document the full scope of what my children had taken from me, and more importantly, what I had given them. I began with the obvious things, the recent financial support I had provided that they seemed to take for granted. Thomas's down payment when he and Kate had found their forever home 3 years ago. They were short $50,000, and I had written the check without hesitation, telling myself it was an investment in my son's future. The loan papers we had drawn up stated he would pay me back within 5 years. But so far, I hadn't seen a single payment. When I had gently brought it up at Christmas, he had laughed it off, saying money was tight with the kids' activities and that I should just consider it an early inheritance. Jessica's master bathroom renovation last spring. She had called me in tears about how embarrassed she was to have her friends over because her bathroom was so outdated. The renovation estimate was $45,000, completely outside their budget. I had transferred the money the same day, telling her that a woman should feel proud of her home. She had promised to pay me back in installments, but those installments had lasted exactly 2 months before she claimed they couldn't afford them anymore. Daniel's business loan when his marketing firm was struggling 2 years ago. He had come to me with a business plan and a desperate plea. His bank had turned him down, and he was facing bankruptcy. I had co-signed a loan for $75,000 and personally guaranteed another $30,000. The business had recovered, but somehow Daniel never seemed to have enough profit to pay down the loans I was still responsible for. Those were just the major items. As I continued writing, the smaller amounts began to add up in ways that shocked even me: car repairs, medical bills, school expenses, emergency funds for unexpected situations. Over the past 5 years alone, I had provided my children with over $350,000 in direct financial support, but the money was only part of the story. I flipped to a new page and began documenting the other ways I had supported their lives. Childcare services. Every week, I spent an average of 12 hours watching my grandchildren while their parents worked, went out, or simply needed a break. I had calculated once that if I charged even minimum wage for babysitting services, I would have earned over $25,000 in the past 2 years alone. Instead, I did it for free because I loved my grandchildren and wanted to help my children manage their busy lives. Home maintenance and repairs. James had been a skilled craftsman. and he had taught me more about home repair than most women of my generation knew. I regularly spent weekends at my children's houses fixing leaky faucets, painting rooms, gardening, and handling maintenance tasks they couldn't afford to hire professionals for. Jessica's guest room renovation had been entirely my labor, saving them at least $8,000 in contractor fees, transportation services. Since my granddaughter Lily had started high school and gotten involved in theater, I had become her unofficial chauffeur between rehearsals, performances, and workshops. I was driving her somewhere at least 3 times a week. Her parents were always too busy with work or their social obligations, so I had stepped in without complaint. Holiday hosting. For the past decade, every major holiday had been celebrated at my house. I planned the menus, bought the groceries, prepared the meals, decorated the house, and cleaned up afterward. My children arrived as guests and left as guests, while I handled all the work and expense of bringing the family together. Gift giving birthdays, Christmas, graduations, achievements, and random acts of generosity had cost me thousands of dollars annually. I kept detailed records for tax purposes, and last year alone, I had spent over $20,000 on gifts for my children and grandchildren. In return, I typically received flowers on Mother's Day and a dinner out for my birthday events that cost them a fraction of what I spent on them. The list continued for pages, professional services I had provided free of charge using connections from my consulting business, references and recommendations that had helped them get jobs and opportunities, financial advice that had saved them from costly mistakes, investment guidance that had grown their retirement accounts using strategies I had developed over decades of business experience. As the plane began its descent toward Honolulu, I closed the notebook and sat back in my seat. The mathematical reality was staggering over the past 5 years. My children had received the equivalent of nearly $700,000 in direct financial support, services, and time from me. In return, they had abandoned me at an airport on my 75th birthday because they couldn't afford the incidental expenses of a trip I was paying for. But the financial calculation wasn't what hurt the most. It was the pattern of behavior it revealed, a pattern I had been too generous or too naive to recognize before today. The disrespect had been escalating for years, phone calls that went unreturned for days, invitations declined at the last minute, conversations cut short because they were too busy for their mother, promises broken, commitments forgotten, and my feelings treated as an afterthought in their increasingly self-centered lives. I thought about the Christmas dinner 2 months ago, when I had spent 3 days preparing a feast for the entire family. Jessica had arrived 2 hours late because she had stopped at a friend's house for cocktails. Thomas had spent most of the meal checking his phone and conducting business calls. Daniel had complained about the music I was playing, the temperature of the house, and the fact that I hadn't bought the specific brand of wine he preferred. The grandchildren had been wonderful. As always, they hugged me, thanked me for their gifts, and genuinely seemed to enjoy spending time with their grandmother. But their parents had treated the entire occasion like an obligation they were grudgingly fulfilling rather than a celebration they were grateful to attend. I thought about my birthday celebrations over the past few years, dinner at restaurants where I paid the bill, gifts that were clearly last-minute purchases with little thought behind them, cars that were signed but not personalized. My children had been going through the motions of loving me without actually putting any effort into the relationship. The plane touched down in Hawaii as the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Other passengers around me were talking excitedly about their vacation plans, checking their phones for messages from family members who were eager to hear about their safe arrival. My phone had remained silent since I had turned it back on after landing. No calls, no texts, no expressions of concern about whether their elderly mother had made it safely to her destination. They had abandoned me at the airport, and now they were simply going about their lives as if I didn't exist. That realization crystallized something inside me that had been building for months, perhaps years. I wasn't just hurt or disappointed anymore. I was angry. Not the hot, explosive anger that burns out quickly, but the cold, steady anger that comes from finally seeing clearly after years of willful blindness. My children had been using me. They had taken my love, my generosity, and my support, and they had given me nothing meaningful in return except the illusion that we had a close family relationship. They treated me like a bank that never required payment, a service provider who never sent a bill, and a babysitter who was always available at their convenience. The drive to the resort gave me more time to think about what I wanted to do with this newfound clarity. The hotel was everything the brochures had promised: a luxury oceanfront property with impeccable service and breathtaking views. The staff welcomed me warmly, upgraded my room when they learned I was celebrating my birthday alone, and made sure I had everything I needed for a comfortable stay. But comfort wasn't what I was thinking about as I unpacked my suitcase in the beautiful suite overlooking the Pacific Ocean. I was thinking about justice. I was thinking about consequences. I was thinking about the fact that my children had never learned the value of what they had been given because they had never had to earn it or risk losing it. I had raised them to be independent, responsible adults, but somewhere along the way, I had enabled them to become selfish, entitled users who took my contributions for granted. The abandonment at the airport wasn't an isolated incident. It was the inevitable result of years of conditioning them to believe that my feelings, my time, and my resources were infinitely available without reciprocation. That night, I sat on my private balcony with a glass of wine, watching the moonlight dance on the ocean waves. The notebook lay open beside me, filled with pages of documentation that told the story of a relationship that had become completely one-sided. Tomorrow, I would begin my vacation as planned, but I would also begin something else. I would begin teaching my children what it felt like to lose something they had taken for granted. As I unpacked my suitcase, I noticed something peculiar tucked between my clothes, a weathered leather travel case I hadn't seen in years. It was James's old toiletry bag, the one he had taken on business trips throughout our marriage. I had no recollection of packing it. With trembling hands, I unzipped it, half expecting to find it empty. Instead, I discovered a small leather-bound journal I had never seen before, along with a sealed envelope with my name on it in James's unmistakable handwriting. I sat on the edge of the bed, heart pounding. Opening the envelope, I pulled out a letter dated just 3 weeks before his death, almost 5 years ago. My dearest Ellie, if you're reading this, you've finally taken that trip to Hawaii we always talked about. I'm sorry I couldn't be there with you to see the sunset over Maui that we promised each other on our 20th anniversary. I've asked Jessica to pack this with your things when you finally go. I hope she remembered, and I hope she and the boys are with you, celebrating the amazing woman you are. There's something I need to tell you, something I was too much of a coward to say while I could still see your face. I've been watching how our children treat you, Ellie, and it breaks my heart. They take advantage of your generosity, your time, your love. I've tried to talk to them about it, but they don't see it. Or worse, they don't want to see it. You deserve better, my love. You deserve gratitude. You deserve respect. You deserve to be cherished by the people who owe you everything. In this journal, I've been keeping notes about our children's behavior, the patterns I've observed, the way they manipulate your love, the way they've come to expect your sacrifice without acknowledgement. I'm not telling you this to hurt you, but because I know that after I'm gone, it will only get worse. You've always been the strong one. Ellie, stronger than me, stronger than anyone I've ever known. It's time to use that strength for yourself. Remember what you taught me, that true love sometimes means making hard choices, that helping someone doesn't always mean giving them what they want. Our children need a lesson in gratitude, in respect, in love. And you, my darling, need to stop being the doormat they wipe their feet on. I love you more than words can say. Live your life, Ellie. Live it for yourself now. Forever yours, James. Tears streamed down my face as I clutched the letter to my chest. Even from beyond the grave, James was looking out for me, seeing what I had been too blind to see. I opened the journal with shaking hands, finding page after page of observations, incidents, and patterns that James had documented over the last year of his life. It was all there the times Thomas had forgotten his father's doctor appointments, but remembered golf games with clients, the times Jessica had borrowed money with vague promises of repayment, the times Daniel had criticized James's investment choices while simultaneously asking for financial help with his business ventures. The final entry, dated just days before James passed away, read, I fear what will happen to Ellie when I'm gone. They will drain her financially, emotionally, physically if she lets them. My greatest regret is not putting a stop to this while I could. My greatest hope is that she will find the strength to do what I could not. I closed the journal, a strange calm settling over me. James had seen it all, had tried in his own way to protect me, and now, from beyond the grave, he was giving me permission to protect myself. It felt like a sign confirmation that the path I was considering wasn't born from birthday disappointment or momentary anger, but from a pattern that had been evident to someone who loved me enough to document it, to warn me, to try to save me from it even after he was gone. I placed the journal and letter carefully on the nightstand. Tomorrow would be the first day of my new life, a life where I valued myself as much as James had valued me, a life where I no longer confused enabling with loving, a life where my relationships would be based on mutual respect rather than one-sided giving. With this resolve firmly in mind, I drifted off to sleep to the sound of ocean waves, feeling James's presence and approval surrounding me like a protective embrace. The next morning, I awoke to brilliant sunshine streaming through my balcony doors. For the first time in years, I felt light, unburdened by the weight of others' expectations and demands. I ordered room service breakfast and enjoyed it on my private lanai, watching early morning surfers ride the waves. Today was a new day, the first day of my 75th year, and I intended to make the most of it. The resort offered a variety of activities, and I decided to step completely out of my comfort zone. I signed up for an introductory scuba diving lesson in the hotel's lagoon, something I had always been too afraid to try because of my lifelong fear of deep water. You're never too old to face your fears, the young instructor told me with an encouraging smile when I admitted my nervousness. 3 hours later, I was floating in the clear blue water, breathing through a regulator, watching tropical fish dart around me in a kaleidoscope of colors. The fear was still there, but I had pushed through it, and the reward was this moment of weightless wonder. As we practiced basic underwater skills, I noticed another participant struggling with his mask. Before the instructor could reach him, the man panicked, flailing in the water. Without thinking, I swam to him, making the calm down signal I'd just learned and helping him clear his mask. The relief in his eyes was immediate, and once we surfaced, his gratitude was effusive. "You really keep your cool in a crisis," he said. "That's the second time today someone's panicked, and the other person had to be taken back to shore." "I've had practice staying calm when others aren't," I replied, surprising myself with the insight. How many family crises had I navigated over the years, always being the steady one, the reliable one, the one who never lost her composure, no matter how many demands were placed on her after the dive lesson. I treated myself to a massage at the resort spa, then spent the afternoon exploring the hotel grounds and nearby shops. I bought myself a beautiful pearl necklace, an extravagant birthday gift that I would normally have talked myself out of as too expensive or unnecessary. Today, it felt like a statement I was worth the investment. I was sipping a Mai Tai at the resort's oceanfront bar, watching the sunset and feeling more peaceful than I had in years, when my phone rang. The screen displayed Jessica's name. For a moment, I considered not answering, but curiosity got the better of me. This was the first contact from any of my children since they had walked away from me at the airport. "Hello, Jessica," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Mom." Her voice was bright and cheerful, as if nothing unusual had happened. "How's Hawaii? Are you having a wonderful time?" The casual tone caught me off guard. She was speaking to me as if we had parted on good terms, as if she hadn't been part of a group decision to abandon me on my birthday. "Hawaii is beautiful," I replied carefully. "The weather has been perfect, and the resort is everything I hoped it would be." "Oh, that's wonderful. I'm so glad you decided to go ahead with the trip. I told Thomas and Daniel that you'd probably enjoy the peace and quiet. You know how chaotic things can get when all the kids are together." Chaotic. She was characterizing what should have been a joyful family celebration as something chaotic that I was better off avoiding. The revisionist history was breathtaking in its audacity. "Jessica," I said, "why are you calling me?" There was a brief pause. "Well, I have a tiny favor to ask. Greg's car broke down this morning, and the repair estimate is pretty steep. We're looking at about $5,000 for transmission work. I know the timing isn't great, but I was wondering if you could help us out. We can pay you back over the next few months." "Of course." I sat in stunned silence for several seconds. She was asking me for money 3 days after abandoning me at an airport because she couldn't afford the incidental expenses of a vacation I was paying for. She was asking me for $5,000 to fix her husband's car. "Let me make sure I understand," I said slowly. "You're calling me in Hawaii, where I'm spending my 75th birthday alone, because you couldn't afford to come on a trip I had paid for, to ask me for money to fix Greg's car." "Well, when you put it like that, it sounds bad," Jessica said with a nervous laugh. "But you know how these things are. Car repairs are emergencies. They just happen at the worst possible times. And my birthday wasn't the worst possible time to abandon your mother." The silence that followed was telling. I could almost hear her brain working, trying to figure out how to navigate this conversation now that I wasn't responding with my usual immediate agreement to help. "Mom, you're being a little dramatic about this. We explained that money was tight for everyone. It wasn't personal." "It wasn't personal," I repeated. "Jessica, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I'm your mother. I planned and paid for a family vacation to celebrate my 75th birthday. You and your brothers decided, without consulting me, that you couldn't afford to go. Now you're asking me for $5,000 for a car repair. How is that not personal?" "Look, Mom, I don't want to fight about this. Can you help us with the car or not?" The bluntness of the question was like a slap across the face. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of how she had hurt me. No recognition that her request was inappropriate given the circumstances. She simply wanted my money, and my feelings about recent events were irrelevant to her. No, I said quietly. I cannot help you with the car repair. What do you mean, no? Jessica's voice shifted from wheedling to sharp. I mean, no, Jessica. I will not be sending you money for Greg's car. Mom, we really need this money. Greg can't get to work without his car. Then I suggest you figure out alternative transportation or find another source of funding. There are buses, ride shares, rental cars, and bank loans available to people who need them. We can't get a bank loan for a car repair. Our credit isn't good enough for an unsecured loan, and we don't have time for the approval process anyway. I almost laughed at the irony. Their credit wasn't good enough for a $5,000 loan, but they felt entitled to that amount from me, with no collateral, no formal agreement, and no realistic repayment plan. Jessica, I'm hanging up now. Enjoy the rest of your day. Mom, wait. You can't just. I ended the call and immediately turned off my phone. My hands were shaking slightly, not from anger, but from the adrenaline of finally standing up for myself in a way I hadn't done in years. Jessica's call had confirmed everything I had concluded during my reflection time. To my children, I wasn't a person with feelings and needs. I was a resource to be tapped whenever they faced financial inconvenience. The timing of her request couldn't have been more perfect for my purposes. It demonstrated beyond any doubt that they had learned nothing from the airport incident and had no intention of examining their behavior or making amends for how they had treated me. An hour later, I turned my phone back on to find 12 missed calls and 18 text messages. The pattern was predictable. Jessica had called Thomas and Daniel to complain that I had refused to help with the car repair. They had then called each other to discuss this unprecedented development. Finally, they had all tried calling me repeatedly, apparently unable to accept that I might not be immediately available to solve their problems. I scrolled through the text messages without reading them carefully. The preview lines showed variations of, Mom, please call me back. We need to talk about this. I don't understand why you're being this way. Not one of them contained an apology or an acknowledgement of how they had treated me. While I was reviewing their increasingly frantic attempts to reach me, my phone rang again. This time it was Thomas, and I decided to answer. Mom, what the hell is going on? His voice was angry, with no attempt at the false cheer Jessica had started with. Jessica says you refuse to help them with their car repair. That's not like you. You're right, Thomas. It's not like me. I'm trying some new approaches to how I handle my relationships. New approaches, Mom? They really need this money. Greg can't miss work because his car is broken. They have bills to pay. I understand that car repairs can be expensive and inconvenient, I said calmly. What I don't understand is why Jessica thought it was appropriate to ask me for money 3 days after she participated in abandoning me at an airport on my birthday. Jesus, Mom, you're not still hung up on that, are you? We explained the situation, money was tight, and we thought you'd enjoy some alone time. Hung up on that, I repeated. Thomas, let me ask you something. If Kate's mother had planned and paid for a family vacation to celebrate her 75th birthday, and you had all agreed to go, and then, at the last minute, you decided to abandon her at the airport because you couldn't afford parking fees, how do you think Kate would react? That's different, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. How is it different? Well, for one thing, Kate's mother isn't as financially comfortable as you are. She couldn't afford to pay for a trip like that in the first place. I felt a cold anger settling over me. So, because I can afford to pay for things, my feelings about being abandoned are less valid than someone else's would be. That's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant. Thomas, you think that because I have money, I don't deserve the same consideration and respect you would show to someone who couldn't help you financially. Mom, you're twisting my words. Look, forget about Hawaii for a minute. Jessica and Greg really need help with this car repair. Can't you just loan them the money? You know they're good for it? Actually, Thomas, I don't know that they're good for it. Jessica still owes me $45,000 from her bathroom renovation, and she stopped making payments on that loan 8 months ago. You owe me $50,000 from your down payment loan, and you've never made a single payment. Daniel owes me over $100,000 in various business loans and guarantees. None of you are good for the money you've already borrowed. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. I had never laid out the numbers so starkly before, never forced them to confront the cumulative scope of their debt to me. Those are different situations, Thomas said finally. Those were family loans. We always understood that family loans were more flexible than bank loans. More flexible, I said. You mean you never intended to pay them back? Mom, that's not fair. We've always intended to pay you back when we could afford it. When you could afford it? Thomas, You bought a $60,000 BMW 6 months ago. You could afford that, but you couldn't afford to make a payment on the loan that helped you buy your house. The BMW was different. I needed that for work. Image is important in my industry. Image, a $60,000 image purchase while you owe your mother $50,000 that you've never attempted to repay. Mom, I don't like the tone you're taking with me. We're family. Family helps each other out. That's what family does. You're absolutely right, Thomas. Family does help each other out. Family shows up for each other's important milestones. Family doesn't abandon each other at airports on their birthdays. Family expresses gratitude when someone makes sacrifices for them. Family treats each other with respect and consideration. We do treat you with respect and consideration. When was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? Not because you needed something. When was the last time you invited me to do something that I would enjoy, rather than expecting me to provide services for your convenience? When was the last time you expressed genuine appreciation for anything I've done for you? The questions hung in the air, unanswered, because we both knew the answers would be uncomfortable for him to acknowledge. Mom, I think you're being unreasonable about this. We love you, and you know we love you. But love doesn't mean we have to follow some rigid schedule of phone calls and thank you notes. No, Thomas, but love does mean you don't abandon someone at an airport on their birthday. Love means you consider their feelings before making decisions that affect them. Love means you treat them at least as well as you would treat a stranger. Fine, he said, his voice tight with frustration. We made a mistake about Hawaii. I'm sorry. Okay, we're all sorry. But that doesn't mean you should punish Jessica and Greg by refusing to help them when they really need it. I'm not punishing anyone. Thomas, I'm simply declining to provide financial assistance to people who have demonstrated that they don't value my presence in their lives except when they need money. That's not true, and you know it. Let me ask you this. If I hadn't refused Jessica's request this morning, how long would it have been before any of you contacted me? Would you have called to see if I made it to Hawaii safely? Would you have called to apologize for how you treated me? Would you have called just to wish me a happy birthday? Another uncomfortable silence stretched between us. I didn't think so, I said. The only reason any of you are calling me now is because I said no to something you wanted. That tells me everything I need to know about how you view our relationship. Mom, this is crazy. You're acting like we're terrible people because we had to cancel a vacation. These things happen. Adults deal with disappointments and move on. Adults also take responsibility for their actions and consider how their behavior affects other people. Adults don't make commitments lightly and break them casually. Adults express gratitude when someone does something generous for them. We are grateful. We've always been grateful for everything you've done for us. Have you, Thomas? When was the last time you said thank you for anything I've done? Not the polite, automatic thank you that people say when someone passes the salt, but a genuine expression of appreciation for a significant favor or gift. I waited, but he didn't answer. I'll tell you when, I continued. It was Christmas morning when you were 12 years old, and I had saved for months to buy you the mountain bike you wanted. You hugged me and told me I was the best mom in the world. That was 34 years ago, Thomas. That was the last time you expressed genuine, heartfelt gratitude for anything I did for you. That's not true. That can't be true. It is true, and the reason I remember it so clearly is because it was so different from how you and your siblings respond to my generosity now. Now you accept whatever I give you as if it's your due, as if I owe it to you simply because I'm your mother. Mom, you're being ridiculous. Of course we appreciate what you do for us. We just don't feel like we need to make a big production out of saying thank you every time. A big production. Thomas, acknowledging someone's generosity isn't a big production. It's basic human decency. It's what you would do for a friend, an acquaintance, or even a stranger who did something nice for you. This is getting blown way out of proportion. Look, I don't have time for this philosophical discussion about gratitude and family dynamics. Jessica needs help with her car repair. Are you going to help her or not? The conversation had come full circle, back to the only thing that really mattered to him, getting money for his sister. Nothing I had said about respect, consideration, or basic human decency had penetrated his self-centered focus on the immediate financial need. No, Thomas, I am not going to help Jessica with her car repair. I am not going to help any of you with anything until you demonstrate that you value me as a person rather than just as a source of funding. What does that mean? Exactly. What do you want us to do? The question revealed everything. He was treating this like a negotiation, as if there were specific hoops he could jump through to restore access to my financial resources. He still didn't understand that this was about fundamental changes in how we related to each other. I want you to figure out your own solutions to your own problems, I said. I want you to learn what it feels like to be truly independent adults who don't rely on their elderly mother to bail them out of every inconvenience. I want you to discover whether you can build relationships with me based on something other than what I can do for you financially. Mom, you're scaring me. This doesn't sound like you at all. You're right. This doesn't sound like the me who has enabled your irresponsibility and selfishness for years. This sounds like the me who has finally realized that helping you in the way I've been helping you isn't actually helping you at all. It's crippling you. Crippling us, Mom. Your help has made our lives better. We've been able to buy homes, start businesses, provide for our families. How is that crippling? Because none of you has learned to do any of those things independently. You've learned to do them with my money, my credit, and my guarantees. You've learned to take calculated risks because you know I'll absorb the losses if things don't work out. You've learned to make financial commitments you can't honor because you know I'll cover the shortfalls. So, what are you saying, that you're never going to help any of us again? I'm saying that I'm done being your safety net. I'm done absorbing the financial consequences of your poor decisions. I'm done subsidizing lifestyles you can't actually afford. I'm done being treated like an ATM instead of a human being. Mom, this is insane. Families help each other. That's what you taught us. I taught you that families help each other. I didn't teach you that one person in the family should carry the financial burden for everyone else while receiving nothing but demands and disrespect in return. We don't disrespect you. Thomas, you abandoned me at an airport on my 75th birthday because you couldn't afford parking fees for a trip I was paying for. 3 days later, your sister called me asking for $5,000 for a car repair. If that's not disrespect, what would you call it? Another long silence stretched between us. When Thomas finally spoke, his voice was different, colder, more calculating. Fine, Mom. If that's how you want to play this, fine. But you should know that this decision is going to affect more than just Jessica's car repair. There are other things, bigger things, that depend on your support. What kind of bigger things? Well, for starters, I'm supposed to close on a refinancing next week that depends on you remaining a co-signer on my mortgage. If you withdraw that support, the deal falls through, and I'll be stuck with my current high interest rate. That sounds like something you should have considered before you decided I wasn't worth spending time with on my birthday. And Daniel's business loan comes up for renewal next month. If you're not willing to continue guaranteeing it, his company could face some serious financial problems. Again, that sounds like a consequence he should have thought about before participating in the decision to abandon me. Mom, you're talking about potentially destroying your children's financial lives over a misunderstanding about a vacation. I'm not destroying anything. Thomas, I'm simply removing myself from financial arrangements that have become one-sided and unsustainable. If your financial lives can't survive without my constant support, then perhaps it's time for you to build more stable foundations. This is vindictive and cruel, and it's not like you. No, Thomas. What's cruel is treating your mother like she's dispensable, except when you need her money. What's vindictive is abandoning someone on their birthday and then calling them 3 days later asking for financial assistance. What's not like me is finally standing up for myself instead of enabling behavior that has become increasingly selfish and disrespectful. There's a difference. The conversation ended with Thomas hanging up on me, which seemed appropriate given how this entire situation had started. I turned off my phone again and sat back in my chair, feeling drained but oddly satisfied. The masks had finally come off. The pretense that our family relationships were based on mutual love and respect had been abandoned in favor of the naked truth. They wanted my money, and they were angry that I was no longer automatically providing it. I ordered another Mai Tai and watched as the last rays of the setting sun painted the ocean in shades of gold and crimson. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But for tonight, I felt a strange peace settling over me. For the first time in years, I was standing up for myself, demanding the respect I deserved, and refusing to be manipulated or used. It was, I realized, the best birthday gift I could have given myself. The following morning, I awoke to the gentle sound of waves crashing against the shore. For a moment, I lay still, savoring the peace before the reality of yesterday's confrontations came rushing back. My phone, which I had turned on briefly before bed, showed dozens of missed calls and texts from my children. They were escalating their efforts to reach me, their messages growing increasingly desperate and accusatory. I scrolled through them, noting the common themes: shock at my sudden change in behavior, thinly veiled threats about the consequences of my decisions, and not a single genuine apology for abandoning me on my birthday. Daniel's text particularly caught my attention. Mom, whatever's gotten into you, we need to talk about it face to face. Some of the things you're threatening to do could have serious legal and financial consequences for all of us. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had spent years making financial decisions that could have serious consequences for me without a second thought. Now that the situation was reversed, they were indignant, but it was the message from my oldest grandson, Ryan, that hit me hardest. Grandma, Mom says you're upset with us about Hawaii. I'm really sorry we couldn't go. I was looking forward to seeing the volcanoes with you. I hope you're not too mad at us. Love you. The 16-year-old had managed to express more genuine regret and affection in 3 sentences than his parents and uncles had managed in dozens of calls and messages. It reminded me that my actions would have consequences beyond my immediate relationship with my children. My grandchildren would be affected too, though hopefully in ways that would ultimately benefit them. I turned off my phone again and decided to embrace the day ahead. I had come to Hawaii for adventure and relaxation, and I wasn't going to let family drama prevent me from enjoying it. After a leisurely breakfast on my balcony, I joined a guided tour to explore the island's lush interior. Our tour group was small, just 8 people plus our guide, a native Hawaiian named Kakoa, with an encyclopedic knowledge of the island's flora, fauna, and history. Among our group was a distinguished-looking man in his early 70s who introduced himself as Howard Brennan. Traveling alone? He asked as we boarded the tour van. Yes, I replied. It wasn't the original plan, but sometimes things work out differently than expected. I know that feeling, he said with a wry smile. I was supposed to be here with my daughter and her family, but a work emergency came up at the last minute. Rather than cancel, I decided to come anyway. That was brave of you, I said, realizing I'd made the same choice. Not brave, stubborn, he corrected with a laugh. I've spent too many years putting things off. At our age, postponing joy seems like a fool's errand. His comment resonated with me, and we fell into easy conversation as the van wound its way through spectacular scenery. Howard, I learned, was a recently retired judge who had spent 40 years on the bench in Chicago. He had a sharp mind, a dry wit, and a perspective on family dynamics that came from decades of watching families navigate conflict in his courtroom. When I mentioned in passing that my own family had decided not to join me at the last minute, he gave me a knowing look. Family disappointments hit differently at our age, he observed. When you realize your runway is getting shorter, every missed opportunity feels more significant. Exactly, I agreed, surprised by his insight. It's not just about a missed vacation, it's about what it represents. By the time our tour reached a magnificent waterfall where we stopped for lunch, Howard and I had established a comfortable rapport. As we sat on a fallen log eating the gourmet picnic provided by the tour company, I found myself sharing more details about my situation. My children abandoned me at the airport on my 75th birthday, I said, surprising myself with my candor. They claimed they couldn't afford the incidental expenses of a trip I was paying for. 3 days later, my daughter called asking to borrow $5,000 for her husband's car repair. Howard didn't look shocked or uncomfortable with my disclosure. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully. And how did you respond to that request? I said no, I replied. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I refused a direct request for financial help from my children. Now they're in a complete uproar, threatening all sorts of dire consequences if I don't return to my role as their personal banker. Howard was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the cascading water of the falls. You know, he said finally, in my years on the bench, I saw countless families destroyed by money, both the lack of it and the excess of it. But the most destructive force wasn't the money itself, it was the expectations around it. What do you mean? I mean that when people come to expect financial support as their due rather than as a gift, it distorts the relationship. The provider becomes valuable primarily as a resource, not as a person. And the recipients often develop a sense of entitlement that prevents them from recognizing the true cost of what they're taking. His words crystallized something I had been feeling but hadn't fully articulated. That's exactly what's happened with my children. They don't see me anymore. They just see what I can do for them. And now you're changing the rules, Howard observed. That's always painful for everyone involved, but sometimes necessary. I'm not just changing the rules, I admitted. I'm considering legal steps to extricate myself from their financial lives, entirely removing myself as a co-signer on loans, calling in personal debts, revoking powers of attorney. Howard's eyebrows rose slightly. That's a significant step. Have you spoken with an attorney about the implications? Not yet. I've been making these decisions based on emotional reaction more than legal strategy. Would you like my perspective? Not as your attorney. Of course, but as someone who's seen how these situations play out. I nodded, grateful for his expertise. First, he said, you have every right to protect your own financial interests, co-signing loans, guaranteeing business debt. These are serious commitments that put your assets at risk. If you no longer trust your children to honor their obligations, extracting yourself from those commitments is prudent, not punitive. That's how I see it, but they're calling me vindictive and cruel. Of course they are, Howard said matter-of-factly. They're losing a valuable financial resource, and they're angry. But here's what I learned from 4 decades watching families fight. When someone accuses you of being cruel for expecting them to handle their own responsibilities, they're telling you more about their sense of entitlement than about your behavior. His words were affirming in a way I desperately needed. For so long, I had accepted my children's narrative about our relationship, that my financial support was simply what mothers do, that their requests were reasonable, that my generosity was expected rather than appreciated. Having an objective outsider validate my perspective was like a weight lifting from my shoulders. The tour continued after lunch, but Howard and I maintained our conversation in quiet moments between stops. By the time we returned to the hotel late that afternoon, we had exchanged phone numbers and agreed to meet for dinner. His company was refreshing intellectually, stimulating without being demanding, supportive without being patronizing. Over dinner at the resort's beachfront restaurant, our conversation deepened. Howard shared stories of his own parenting journey, the mistakes he'd made with his daughter, the boundaries he'd had to establish, the difficult lessons learned. I enabled her for years, he admitted. Private school, college, law school, I paid for everything, then a condo as a graduation gift. I thought I was being a good father, removing obstacles from her path. It took me too long to realize I was actually removing her incentive to develop resilience and self-sufficiency. What changed? I asked. She came to me for money to cover credit card debt. She'd accumulated luxury purchases, expensive vacations, things she couldn't possibly afford on a first-year associate's salary. When I suggested she sell the condo instead, she was indignant. That's when I realized what I'd created, someone who saw my resources as an extension of her own, with no concept of limits or gratitude. How did you handle it? Not well, at first, he admitted ruefully. There were arguments, accusations, tears. She didn't speak to me for nearly a year, but I held firm. No more bailouts, no more solving problems that she had created through poor choices. And now, a smile spread across his face, now we have a healthier relationship than we've ever had. It took time, several years, actually, but she found her way, sold the condo, paid off her debts, learned to live within her means. More importantly, she developed a sense of pride in her own accomplishments that no amount of paternal assistance could have given her. That's what I want for my children, I said softly. Not to punish them, but to help them discover their own strength. Then stand your ground, Howard advised. It will get worse before it gets better. They'll escalate their tactics, guilt, anger, manipulation. They might even try to question your mental competency. I laughed. They've already started hinting at that. Apparently, the only explanation for a mother expecting adult children to behave responsibly is early onset dementia. Howard's eyes crinkled with humor. Ah, yes, the mom's lost her mind defense. Classic move when the bank of mom and dad suddenly closes its doors. We continued talking until the restaurant closed, sharing insights, experiences, and the unique perspective that comes from having lived long enough to recognize patterns. By the time Howard walked me back to my suite, I felt more certain than ever that I was taking the right approach with my children, difficult as it might be. I'm giving a talk at the legal conference I'm here for tomorrow, Howard said as we reached my door. But I'm free for dinner again if you'd like company. I'd like that very much, I replied, surprised by how much I meant it. The next morning, I decided to face another fear, the deep water that had always terrified me. The resort offered a boat excursion to a prime snorkeling spot, and I signed up despite the anxiety that knotted my stomach at the thought of floating in deep ocean. First time snorkeling? Asked the young woman who helped fit me with fins and a mask at the boat dock. Yes, I admitted. I've always been afraid of deep water, but I'm trying to break out of old patterns. She smiled encouragingly. That's awesome. My grandmother just started swimming last year at 80. She says she spent too many years watching from the shore while everyone else had fun. That sentiment echoed my own feelings as I boarded the boat with about 20 other guests. For too long, I had been the one who stayed safely on shore financially, emotionally, adventurously, while others took risks and had experiences. It was time to change that pattern in every area of my life. The boat ride to the snorkeling spot took about 30 minutes, during which our guides provided instructions and safety information. My anxiety built as we approached the site, a protected cove with crystal clear water that allowed visibility down to about 30 feet. Remember, you can always come back to the boat if you're uncomfortable, one of the guides reassured me, noticing my nervousness as we prepared to enter the water. And I'll be right there if you need anything. With a deep breath, I stepped off the platform into the ocean. The initial shock of submersion quickly gave way to wonder as I looked down through my mask at the underwater world below. Colorful fish darted between coral formations. Sea turtles glided gracefully through the water, and sunlight filtered through the surface, creating dancing patterns on the ocean floor. I was so entranced by the beauty around me that I temporarily forgot my fear, floating peacefully above this magical ecosystem. Then, a sudden movement in my peripheral vision startled me, a large shadow passing nearby. I turned to see a massive sea turtle swimming directly toward me, much larger than the others I had observed from a distance. My initial instinct was panic, but I forced myself to remain calm, remembering the guide's instructions to stay still if a turtle approached. The magnificent creature swam within a few feet of me, regarding me with ancient eyes before gracefully changing course and gliding away. The encounter left me breathless with awe. This beautiful being had been navigating these waters for decades, perhaps longer than I had been alive, completely untroubled by the human visitors in its domain. There was a wisdom in its unhurried movement, a peace in its acceptance of whatever the ocean brought its way. As I continued exploring, I noticed a commotion nearby. A young woman was flailing in the water, clearly panicking. Her snorkel had come loose, and she was struggling to stay afloat while gasping for air. Without thinking, I swam to her, my own fears forgotten in the face of her distress. "You're okay," I said calmly, reaching her side. "Put your feet down. We can stand here." She hadn't realized we were in a shallow section of the cove, just over 5 feet deep. As her feet touched the sandy bottom, relief flooded her features. I helped her adjust her mask and snorkel, showing her how to clear water from the tube. "Thank you," she gasped when she could speak. "I'm not a strong swimmer, and when water got in my snorkel, I panicked. I understand completely," I assured her. "I've been afraid of deep water my whole life. This is my first time snorkeling." "Really?" She looked surprised. "You seemed so confident coming to help me." I guess sometimes we find courage we didn't know we had when someone else needs us. As we swam back toward the boat together, I reflected on that truth. How many times in my life had I found strength not for myself, but for others, for my children when they were young, for James during his illness, for clients when my business faced challenges. I had never lacked courage. I had simply directed it outward rather than using it to address my own needs and fears. Back at the resort that afternoon, I turned on my phone briefly to check messages. Among the continued barrage from my children was an email from Kate, Thomas's wife, with the subject line, "Please read important." Unlike the confrontational messages from my children, Kate's email was measured and thoughtful. "Eleanor, I'm writing separately because I think you might be more receptive to hearing a different perspective. While I understand the hurt you're feeling about the Hawaii situation, and yes, I agree it was handled poorly by everyone, I'm concerned about the ripple effects of the financial decisions you're considering. Thomas told me you're thinking of removing yourself as co-signer on our mortgage and calling in the loan you gave us for our down payment. I need to be candid with you about what this would mean for our family. We would almost certainly lose our home. Our credit isn't strong enough to refinance without your co-signature, and we don't have $50,000 to repay the down payment loan immediately. The children would have to change schools, and we'd face significant financial hardship. I'm not saying this to manipulate you or make you feel guilty. I'm simply being honest about the consequences. If you feel this is what you need to do, we will find a way to manage. But I wanted you to have all the information before making your final decision. Whatever you decide, I hope we can find a way forward that allows us to rebuild the family relationships that I know are important to all of us. Kate. Her email gave me pause. Unlike my children's angry demands and threats, Kate had acknowledged the legitimacy of my hurt feelings while honestly outlining the potential consequences of my actions. She hadn't tried to tell me what I should do, only what might happen if I proceeded. I appreciated her approach, but it didn't change my fundamental decision. My children needed to learn independence, and continuing to protect them from the consequences of their financial choices wouldn't serve that goal. Still, Kate's email suggested she might be an ally in rebuilding healthier family dynamics once the immediate crisis had passed. I drafted a brief, respectful reply, Kate. "Thank you for your thoughtful email. I appreciate your candor and the respectful way you've expressed your concerns. My decisions about financial entanglements with my children aren't being made lightly or out of a desire to cause hardship. They reflect a recognition that the current patterns in our family relationships aren't healthy for any of us. I understand there will be challenging consequences, and I'm genuinely sorry for the disruption this will cause. But I believe that in the long term, everyone will be better off building financial lives that don't depend on my continual intervention. I'm open to discussing transition plans that might make these changes less abrupt, but I'm firm in my commitment to changing the dynamics that have led us to this point. Eleanor. After sending the email, I turned my phone off again and prepared for my dinner with Howard. Our second evening together was even more enjoyable than the first. We discovered shared interests in classical music, historical fiction, and mid century architecture. The conversation flowed effortlessly, punctuated by laughter and moments of profound connection. You know, Howard said as we shared a dessert, when my daughter finally stopped seeing me as a walking ATM, she started seeing me as a person again. It was like rediscovering each other after years of playing prescribed roles. That's what I want with my children, I admitted, not to punish them, but to give us all the chance to build relationships based on genuine connection rather than financial dependency. It's worth fighting for, Howard agreed, even if it gets messy along the way. And messy it would get, as I discovered the next morning. I awoke early and decided to check my messages before starting the day. Among them was a voicemail from Daniel that made my blood run cold. Mom, this has gone far enough. His voice was tight with barely controlled anger. We've been talking to Dr. Peterson about your sudden personality changes, and he agrees there might be something medically wrong. We're looking into options for having you evaluated when you get back. This isn't like you, and we're worried. If you don't start answering our calls and being reasonable about this situation, we might have to take more formal steps to protect you and us from these irrational decisions you're making. The threat was unmistakable. They were suggesting I might be mentally incompetent and hinting at seeking some kind of guardianship or control over my affairs. The weaponization of concern was a new low, even for them. My hands shook as I dialed Howard's room. Despite the early hour, he answered immediately. Eleanor, is everything all right? Not really, I admitted. I just received a voicemail from my son threatening to have me evaluated for mental incompetence because I refuse to continue financing their lives. They're talking to my doctor and exploring formal steps to protect themselves from my irrational decisions. Howard's voice sharpened. This is exactly what I warned you about the escalation of tactics when financial manipulation fails. Are you free for breakfast? I think we need to talk about this immediately. 30 minutes later, we were seated in a quiet corner of the resort's breakfast terrace. Howard had brought a legal pad and was taking notes as I played Daniel's message for him. Classic intimidation technique, he said when the message ended. They're hoping the threat of questioning your competency will frighten you back into compliance. It is frightening, I admitted. Could they actually do this? They can try, Howard said, but it's extraordinarily difficult to have someone declared incompetent based solely on financial decisions the family doesn't like, especially someone like you, clearly lucid, independent, with no history of cognitive issues or irrational behavior. How should I respond? First, don't engage with the threat directly that only legitimizes it. Second, document everything. Keep all voicemails, texts, emails that demonstrate their financial motives. Third, when you return home, see your doctor independently and establish that you're of sound mind. And fourth, consult an elder law attorney immediately. His calm, methodical approach helped steady my nerves. I never imagined my own children would go this far, I said quietly. Unfortunately, I've seen it many times, Howard replied. When significant financial interests are at stake, some people will go to extraordinary lengths to protect them, even at the cost of family relationships. Do you think they actually believe I'm incompetent? Or is this purely tactical? Howard considered the question. Probably a bit of both. They need to believe there's something wrong with you to justify their behavior to themselves. It's easier to tell themselves, Mom's not thinking clearly, than to admit, we've been taking advantage of Mom for years. After breakfast, Howard had to attend his conference sessions, but he promised to meet me for dinner to continue our discussion. Left to my own devices, I decided to clear my head with a long walk on the beach. The Pacific stretched endlessly before me, waves rolling in with hypnotic regularity. There was something comforting about the ocean's indifference to human drama. It simply continued its eternal rhythm regardless of the turmoil in my family. As I walked, letting the warm sand massage my bare feet, I thought about the patterns in my own life that had led to this point. I had always been the problem solver, the fixer, the one who stepped in when difficulties arose. When James was alive, we had made a conscious effort to raise independent children, but after his death, something had shifted, perhaps in my grief. I had found comfort in being needed. Perhaps they had sensed my vulnerability and learned to exploit it, whatever the cause. We had developed a dynamic that served none of us well. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I had brought it along in case Howard needed to reach me. The screen showed a number I didn't recognize, but the Boston area code prompted me to answer. Mrs. Wilson? This is Lily. My granddaughter's voice caught me by surprise. Lily, how are you calling me? I'm using Emma's phone, she explained, referring to Thomas's daughter. Mom and Dad don't know I'm calling you. At 16, Lily was at that fascinating threshold between childhood and adulthood, intelligent, perceptive, and increasingly independent in her thinking. Is everything all right? I asked. Not really, she said, her voice lowering. Everyone's freaking out here. Mom and Dad are fighting. Uncle Thomas is yelling at Aunt Kate for emailing you. And Uncle Daniel keeps talking about power of attorney stuff. It's all about money, and it's gross. Her characterization, it's gross, was so perfectly teenage and yet so accurate that I almost laughed despite the seriousness of the situation. I'm sorry you're having to witness all this. Sweetheart, Grandma, I need to tell you something, she continued, her voice urgent. They didn't just decide at the last minute not to go to Hawaii. They've been planning to bail for months. My heart sank. What do you mean? I overheard Mom and Dad talking about it way back in March. Dad said something like, we can let her plan it and then back out at the last minute. She'll still go and have a good time without us. They were laughing about how they could use the money they'd save by not going to renovate their bathroom. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Not only had they abandoned me on my birthday, but they had planned to do so from the beginning, stringing me along for months while I excitedly made arrangements for a family celebration they never intended to attend. Are you sure about this, Lily? Positive. And that's not all. Last Christmas, when you gave everyone those envelopes with the Hawaii plans, I saw Mom and Uncle Thomas exchanging looks. Later, I heard Mom tell Dad that your birthday trip was perfect timing because they've been wanting to redo their master bathroom. My mind flashed back to Christmas morning, the envelopes I had carefully prepared with details of the Hawaii trip, my excitement as they opened them, their seemingly enthusiastic responses. Had it all been an act? Had they been planning to disappoint me even as they hugged me and thanked me for the generous gift? Why are you telling me this, Lily? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Because it's wrong, she said simply. They're treating you like crap, and now they're acting like you're the bad guy for not giving them more money. Ryan and I have been talking about it, and we think it's really messed up. Out of the mouths of babes, my teenage grandchildren had a clearer moral compass than their parents. Thank you for telling me, I said, my voice thick with emotion. It means a lot to know that you and Ryan understand. We love you, Grandma, and we're really sorry about your birthday trip. I wanted to go. I've been practicing my hula and everything. That made me smile despite the pain. I would have loved to see that. Maybe someday. I should go, she said suddenly. I think Mom's coming. Don't tell them I called. Okay. Your secret is safe with me. I love you, Lily. Love you too, Grandma. Stay strong. After we hung up, I continued my beach walk, processing this new information. The deliberate deception stung even more than the abandonment itself. They had never intended to celebrate my birthday. With me, the financial excuse had been just that, an excuse to cover a plan that had been in place for months. By the time I returned to the resort, I had reached a new level of clarity about what needed to happen. This wasn't just about teaching my children financial independence, it was about addressing a pattern of dishonesty and manipulation that had corrupted our entire family dynamic. I met Howard for dinner and shared what Lily had told me. His expression darkened as he listened. That changes things, he said when I finished. This wasn't a hasty decision made under financial pressure. It was a calculated deception carried out over months. That speaks to a deeper problem in your relationship with your children. I know, I agreed, and it means I need to be even more resolute in changing those patterns. No more half measures or gradual transitions. What are you thinking? I'm thinking it's time to completely disentangle myself financially, legally, and emotionally. No more co-signing, no more loans, no more being the family safety net. They need to experience the full reality of independence, including the consequences of their choices. Howard nodded slowly. It won't be easy. They'll fight you every step of the way. I know, but for the first time in years, I'm fighting for myself, and that feels right. The remainder of my Hawaiian vacation passed in a blend of adventure, self-discovery, and strategic planning. Howard and I spent our evenings discussing practical steps for my return home. While my days were filled with experiences I'd always wanted to try, but had put off helicopter tours over volcanic craters, surfing lessons at 75, traditional luau's, and quiet moments of reflection on beaches that seemed to stretch to infinity. On my final night in Hawaii, Howard and I shared a farewell dinner. Our connection had deepened over the week, evolving from chance acquaintances to something approaching friendship. As we toasted with champagne, he raised a surprising possibility. I'll be in Boston next month for a legal conference, he mentioned casually. Perhaps we could continue our conversations there. The invitation hung in the air between us, not quite romantic, but definitely personal. After a moment's consideration, I nodded. I'd like that very much, I replied. By then, I'll have stories to tell about how all this played out. I have no doubt, he said with a smile. You're a formidable woman, Eleanor Wilson. Your children don't know what they're up against. The next morning, as my plane lifted off from Honolulu International Airport, I felt a mix of emotion sadness at leaving the paradise that had become a sanctuary of self-discovery, anxiety about the confrontations that awaited me at home, but predominantly a steadfast determination to reclaim my life and relationships on healthier terms. During the long flight, I finalized my action plan, making detailed notes about each step I would take upon returning home. By the time we landed in Boston, I was ready. My house felt different when I walked through the front door, the same physical space I had left 8 days earlier. But my relationship to it had changed. For years, it had felt like the headquarters of a family support operation, with me as the chief executive responsible for solving everyone's problems and funding everyone's dreams. Now it felt like my home, a space where I could make decisions based on my own needs and preferences, where I could invest my time and energy in pursuits that brought me joy rather than obligation. I had just finished unpacking when my doorbell rang. Taking a deep breath, I opened it to find all three of my children standing on the porch. Jessica stepped forward, arms extended as if to embrace me. Mom, she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, we're so glad you're home safely. We've been worried sick about you. I stepped back, avoiding the embrace, and gestured for them to come inside. I'm sure you have been. Please have a seat in the living room. They filed in and arranged themselves on my furniture with the careful positioning of people preparing for a difficult negotiation. Thomas and Daniel sat on the couch, while Jessica took the armchair closest to where I was standing. Mom, Thomas began, we need to talk about what's been happening since you left for Hawaii. We're all very concerned about some of the decisions you seem to be making. What decisions are those, Thomas? Well, for starters, the phone calls to banks and credit card companies, the threats to withdraw from loan agreements and co-signer arrangements, the refusal to help Jessica with her car repair. This isn't like you at all. You're right, it's not like me. The me you're familiar with would have absorbed the emotional damage from being abandoned on my birthday and continue providing financial support as if nothing had happened. The me you're talking to now has decided that pattern is no longer sustainable. Mom, Jessica interjected, we didn't abandon you. We explained that money was tight and we couldn't afford the incidental expenses of the trip. You're making this sound much more dramatic than it actually was. Jessica, let me ask you something. If I had planned and paid for a vacation to celebrate your 50th birthday, and at the last minute, I had decided I couldn't afford parking fees, so I wasn't going, how would you feel? That's different. How is it different? Well, you're more financially secure than we are. You can afford to absorb those kinds of disappointments. The casual dismissal of my emotional well-being based on my financial status was exactly the kind of thinking that had led us to this point. In Jessica's mind, having money meant I didn't deserve the same consideration she would expect for herself. Jessica, my ability to afford disappointments doesn't make them less disappointing. My financial security doesn't make abandonment less hurtful. Mom, Daniel said, I think you're blowing this whole thing out of proportion. We made a difficult decision based on our financial circumstances. It wasn't personal, and it wasn't meant to hurt you. It wasn't meant to hurt me. Daniel, what did you think would happen when you all decided to abandon me at an airport on my 75th birthday? Did you think I would be happy about spending the celebration alone? We thought you'd understand our situation and be flexible about it. Flexible? You thought I'd be flexible about being discarded when I became inconvenient for you. That's not what happened, and you know it, Thomas said, his voice rising with frustration. We're facing real financial pressures, and we made a responsible decision not to take on expenses we couldn't afford. Thomas, you bought a $60,000 BMW 6 months ago. Jessica redecorated her bathroom last year. Daniel took his family to Disney World in the spring. But you couldn't afford the incidental expenses of a trip I was paying for. Those were planned expenses that fit into our budgets, Jessica said defensively. The Hawaii trip would have involved unpredictable costs that we couldn't control. Unpredictable costs. Jessica, we planned this trip for 8 months. We discussed the budget in detail multiple times. What costs were unpredictable? The silence that followed was telling. They had no reasonable answer because their financial excuse had been exactly that, an excuse to avoid spending time with me without appearing ungrateful for the expensive gift I was offering. Look, Mom, Thomas said, maybe we could have handled the communication better. Maybe we should have talked to you more about our concerns before making the decision. But that doesn't justify the nuclear option you're threatening now. The nuclear option is that what you call me withdrawing from financial arrangements that have become completely one-sided. Mom, you're talking about potentially destroying our financial lives over a misunderstanding about a vacation. I'm not destroying anything, Thomas. I'm simply removing myself from financial obligations that I no longer feel comfortable maintaining. If your financial lives can't survive without my constant support, then perhaps you need to build more sustainable foundations. This is insane, Daniel said, standing up and beginning to pace. Mom, I could lose my business if you withdraw your loan guarantees. Thomas could lose his house if you don't co sign his refinancing. Jessica could face bankruptcy if you remove yourself from her credit arrangements. You're talking about ruining your children's lives because your feelings got hurt. The threat was clear. If I didn't restore their access to my financial resources, I would be responsible for whatever catastrophes befell them. It was emotional blackmail disguised as a statement of fact. Daniel, if your business can't survive without my personal guarantees, then it's not a viable business. If Thomas can't qualify for a mortgage on his own merits, then perhaps he can't actually afford the house he's trying to buy. If Jessica's financial life collapses without access to my credit, Mom, Jessica said, tears beginning to form in her eyes, we're your children. You raised us to depend on your support. No, Jessica, I raised you to be independent, responsible adults. Somewhere along the way, I enabled you to become financially dependent on me instead. That was my mistake, and I'm correcting it now. By destroying our lives, Thomas asked incredulously. By forcing you to build lives that don't require constant financial support from your elderly mother. As we argued, I felt a strange sensation in my chest, a tightness that quickly transformed into a sharp, stabbing pain. I gasped, pressing my hand against my sternum. Mom, Daniel's angry expression changed to concern. Are you okay? I tried to respond, but the pain intensified, radiating down my left arm. My vision blurred at the edges, and I felt myself swaying. Mom, Jessica jumped up, rushing to my side as I sank into the nearest chair. What's happening? I think I need to go to the hospital, I managed to say through gritted teeth. It feels like heart attack. The next few minutes were a blur of activity. Thomas called 911 while Daniel knelt beside me, taking my pulse and asking questions about my symptoms. Jessica ran to get my purse and medication list. In that moment of crisis, the anger and recriminations vanished, replaced by genuine concern and coordinated action. My children, whatever their flaws, responded to my medical emergency with efficiency and care. The ambulance arrived quickly, and as the paramedics prepared to transport me, I heard Thomas say, I'm coming with you, Mom. Jessica and Daniel will follow in the car. I nodded weakly, too focused on the pain to speak. As we raced toward the hospital, lights flashing and siren wailing, I couldn't help but think about the irony it had taken a potential heart attack to restore my children's attention to me as a person rather than a financial resource. In the emergency room, doctors moved swiftly, connecting me to monitors, drawing blood, and administering medication for the pain. Tests confirmed what I had suspected. I was having a heart attack, though thankfully not a massive one. The cardiologist explained that I would need additional tests to determine the extent of the damage and the appropriate treatment. My children remained at the hospital throughout the night, taking turns sitting with me as I drifted in and out of sleep, heavily sedated but stable. In my more lucid moments, I observed their worried faces, their whispered conversations, their gentle touches to my hand or shoulder. By morning, the cardiologist had reviewed all my tests and came to deliver the news. My children gathered around my bed, faces tense with concern. Mrs. Wilson, you've had what we call a moderate heart attack, he explained. There's some damage to the heart muscle, but it's not as severe as it could have been. However, the tests show significant blockage in several coronary arteries that will need to be addressed. What does that mean? Thomas asked. It means your mother will need bypass surgery, the doctor replied. It's a serious procedure, but one we perform regularly with good outcomes in patients who are otherwise healthy. What are the risks? Daniel's voice was strained. As with any major surgery, there are risks: infection, bleeding, stroke, and your mother's age is a factor. But without the surgery, the risk of another potentially fatal heart attack is significantly higher. Jessica gripped my hand. When would this surgery happen? We'd like to schedule it within the next week, once Mrs. Wilson has stabilized from this event. The procedure itself takes several hours, followed by at least a week in the hospital, and then several months of cardiac rehabilitation. After the doctor left, my children remained silent, absorbing the gravity of the situation. Finally, Thomas spoke. Mom, we're going to get through this together. Whatever you need, we're here for you. The irony wasn't lost on me, or apparently on him, as he quickly added, "And I don't mean that the way it sounded. I mean, we're going to support you, not the other way around, for once." I managed a weak smile. "Thank you. I appreciate that." Over the next several days in the hospital, a subtle shift occurred in my children's behavior. They organized themselves into a schedule to ensure someone was always with me. They asked detailed questions of the medical staff, researched the surgical procedure, and began preparing for my recovery period. More significantly, they really talked to me in ways they hadn't in years. Between medical discussions and practical planning, we had conversations about memories, hopes, fears, and regrets. Without the distraction of financial negotiations, we rediscovered aspects of our relationships that had been buried under years of transactions and expectations. On the third day, as Jessica sat beside my bed helping me eat the unappetizing hospital lunch, she suddenly put down the spoon and looked at me directly. "I'm sorry, Mom," she said, her voice cracking. "Not just about Hawaii, but about everything. Lily told me she called you and what she said. She was right, we did plan to back out of the trip months ago. It was selfish and cruel, and you deserved better." The admission stunned me. I hadn't expected such direct acknowledgement of their deception. "Why," I asked simply, "why go through the pretense for so long?" Jessica's eyes filled with tears. "Because we're awful people. Because we've gotten so used to taking from you that we stopped seeing you as a person with feelings. I don't know, Mom. I really don't. But this," she gestured toward my hospital bed, the monitors, the IV lines. "This has made me realize what I could lose. And it's not the money or the support or the safety net, it's you." Her words were healing in a way no medication could achieve. That evening, Thomas made a similar apology, followed by Daniel the next morning. Each acknowledged not just the Hawaii deception, but the years of taking advantage of my generosity without reciprocating with respect or gratitude. By the time I was scheduled for surgery, a week after my heart attack, something fundamental had shifted in our family dynamic. My children were still frightened about the procedure and its risks, but they were facing those fears together, supporting each other and me in ways I hadn't seen since they were young. As I was wheeled into the operating room, each of them kissed my forehead and whispered words of love and encouragement. The last thing I remember before the anesthesia took effect was the thought that whatever happened on the operating table, I had already received the gift I most wanted: the restoration of genuine connection with my children. The surgery was long and complex, but successful. When I awoke in the recovery room, groggy and in pain but alive, my children were waiting. The road to recovery would be challenging: months of rehabilitation, lifestyle changes, medication adjustments, but I was not facing it alone. During my hospital stay, I discovered that my children had been busy making arrangements for my recovery. They had hired a home health aide, researched cardiac rehabilitation programs, and organized a schedule to ensure one of them would be with me daily for the first month after discharge. Most surprisingly, they had done all this without accessing my bank accounts or asking for financial contributions. When I asked Jessica how they were managing the expenses, she shook her head. "Mom, this isn't about money. This is about taking care of you the way you've always taken care of us. We figured it out. Thomas sold his BMW and bought a sensible used car. Daniel has restructured his business loans through a different bank. I've taken on extra freelance work. We're handling it." Their actions spoke louder than any apology could. They were demonstrating, through choices and sacrifices, that they understood the message I had tried to convey before my health crisis: that true independence meant taking responsibility for one's own decisions and their consequences. By the time I was discharged from the hospital 2 weeks after surgery, our family relationships had undergone a profound transformation. The crisis had forced us all to confront the unhealthy patterns that had developed over years, and my children had risen to the challenge in ways I hadn't dared hope for. As Thomas wheeled me out of the hospital to his newly acquired used sedan, he mentioned casually, "By the way, Mom, Howard Brennan called. He said to tell you he's looking forward to seeing you when you're feeling better." I couldn't suppress a smile. "Howard called?" "Yes, several times actually. He seems very concerned about you. Nice guy, a judge, right? How do you know him?" "We met in Hawaii," I replied, enjoying the surprise on Thomas's face. "He was very helpful when I was planning some changes in my life." "Changes like cutting us off financially?" Thomas asked, but his tone held curiosity rather than accusation. "Among other things," I admitted. "He helped me see that I deserved relationships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided giving." Thomas was quiet as he helped me into the car. As we pulled away from the hospital, he said thoughtfully, "He was right. You do deserve that, and I'm sorry it took a heart attack for us to realize it." Better late than never, I replied, watching the hospital recede in the side mirror, like my old patterns of enabling. It was disappearing behind me as I moved forward into a new chapter of my life. The months of recovery that followed were challenging physically, but rewarding emotionally. My children remained present and supportive without reverting to financial dependence. They had found their own solutions to the problems I had previously solved for them, demonstrating capabilities they perhaps hadn't known they possessed. Jessica sold her oversized house and moved to a more modest home she could afford independently. Thomas restructured his family's finances, cutting luxuries and finding additional income sources. Daniel's business thrived under the pressure of true market forces rather than maternal safety nets. More importantly, our relationships evolved. We began enjoying each other's company for its own sake, not as a prelude to financial transactions or obligation fulfillment. We discovered shared interests, had meaningful conversations, and developed mutual respect that had been missing for too long. 6 months after my surgery, I was sitting on my patio enjoying the spring sunshine when Howard arrived for a visit. He had kept in touch throughout my recovery, and our connection had deepened through regular phone calls and occasional visits when his work brought him to Boston. "You look wonderful," he said, taking the seat beside me. "How are you feeling?" "Better than I have in years," I replied truthfully, "not just physically, but in every way that matters." "And your children, has the transformation lasted?" I smiled, thinking of the family dinner we'd shared the previous evening, laughter-filled, relaxed, with no undercurrents of financial expectation or manipulation. "It has. They've changed in ways I wouldn't have thought possible. They're taking responsibility for their own lives, making better choices, and most importantly, they're relating to me as a person they value rather than a resource they can tap." "I'm glad," Howard said, reaching over to take my hand. "You deserved that all along." As we sat together in comfortable silence, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this point. What had begun as a birthday abandonment had evolved into the most meaningful gift I had ever received, the gift of authentic relationships with my children, based not on financial dependency, but on genuine love and respect. Sometimes, I realized, the most valuable presents come wrapped in painful packages. My 75th birthday had indeed been a turning point, though not in the way I had planned. Instead of a luxurious Hawaiian celebration surrounded by family, I had received something far more precious: the opportunity to reclaim my dignity, assert my worth, and rebuild family connections on a foundation of mutual respect rather than one-sided giving. And as I sat hand in hand with Howard, watching the spring flowers sway in the gentle breeze, I felt profoundly grateful for the abandonment that had set me free.